In 1974, my mom had divorced my biological dad, and he was pretty much out of the picture in my life from that point forward. And so as a single mom, she invited my grandma to move into our home with us, to help with the household and taking care of me and my brother. Now, my mom made sure that my brother and I respected our grandma. We listened to her, that we obeyed her just as if it was our mom. And from my perspective, my mom held my grandma in such high regard, like her best friend, but then also something even higher than a best friend. Grandma was always held in a place of honor in our home. Eventually, my mom got remarried, and my dad then adopted me and my brother when I was in the 3rd grade. He was Air Force, but then after he retired from active duty, he went on to work for the Department of Defense. And he was not only our provider, but also my grandma's as well. And he took her as one of his dependents as well. My brother and I would eventually grow up, leave home. We went to college, we got married, we had kids of our own. But my grandma continued to live with my parents for the next 30 years. And she truly lacked for nothing. As she aged, she had all of her medical and prescription needs covered through the loss of her vision, a fall and a broken hip and surgery and recovery, a major cross-country move from Illinois down to Texas. Through it all, my dad helped care for my grandma as if she was his own mom. And I love this little tidbit. As far as I know, my grandma only had 2 real vices: Fountain Coca-Cola and Taco Bell chalupas. It was a problem. But my dad would graciously run to Taco Bell once a week to get her a chalupa and a Coke. When grandma needed assistance to be able to walk through the house, my dad would put up railings along the hallways. When she needed a motorized scooter, he widened the door frames. And my mom would move heaven and earth for my grandma. There's no finer example of a daughter who watched over her mother than the way my mom did for my grandma. My parents honored and respected grandma in word and deed, meeting all of her needs as best as they could. Even in her last moments, my dad on one side of the bed and my mom on the other side of the bed helped to lift grandma up as she took her final breath at home. I had a childhood friend who once said to me that he and his family had to go to Florida so they could see his grandma. And I thought, well, that's a weird thing to say. Why is she in Florida? It just seemed odd to me. I assumed everyone's grandma lived with them. It was the norm, and I never thought it could be any different, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. I'm so grateful for my mom and bringing grandma into our home to live with us, and I can't overstate the impact of my grandma's influence in my life. One of the greatest ways she influenced all was through her music. She put me on the piano bench at the age of 4, and that began my lifelong passion and pursuit of music. And she helped to get us connected with our local church, First Christian Church in Belleville, Illinois. And through those two things intersecting, church and music, I found myself as a little boy just captivated. I would sit on the front pew and watch the pianist and the way she would play all those gospel hymns that the church would sing. My first piano solo in church was my own original arrangement of Blessed Assurance. And I had a couple other keyboards that I set up, one up on top of the piano and one over here to the side. And I thought it was really cool because I was going between 3 piano and, it was awful. But the church loved it. Whenever I needed a keyboard or any kind of instrument or some type of musical equipment, or my brother needed a guitar, if our parents didn't help us get it, or if my brother and I hadn't saved up enough money to get it for ourselves, Grandma came through. She was building into us a legacy that would be cast out over generations. I don't want to paint too rosy of a picture of it. Things weren't always perfect. My family has had its trials and our dark moments. But through everything, we've chosen grace rather than resentment. And I don't know if anybody thought of it in biblical terms at the time, and probably they didn't, but my parents were living out the fifth commandment: honor your father and your mother. My brother and I had a front row seat to seeing God's word alive and in action. Paul wrote to the Ephesian church and quoted from the fifth commandment in the 6th chapter, and he says, honor your father and mother, and he adds the phrase, this is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. Some scholars suggest that Paul was actually mistaken here because the second commandment contains a promise. But I think it's better for us to think of that promise in the second commandment as really more of a warning. It's a warning for the nation of Israel to keep the covenantal relationship that God is establishing with them in the giving of these 10 commandments. So it's as if the Lord is saying to them, if you divide your love for me and break our covenant, then you will not be able to enjoy all the benefits of my covenantal love for you. Whereas if you keep your love wholly undivided for me, then all the benefits of my love are yours. Now, to get a better idea of what this promise is, I'd like to take us to Deuteronomy chapter 6. And verses 4 through 6 specifically are what's known as the Great Shema. And this is a very holy text for the nation of Israel and for Jews even today. In Deuteronomy 5, see, we get the second giving of the 10 commandments. The Lord gives them to the people in Exodus 20, and then again in Deuteronomy chapter 5. And then in the very next chapter, Deuteronomy 6, God continues to speak. And I'm going to go through this line by line and give some commentary along the way. The Lord says, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. See, this is that covenantal language of love. God is saying, all of me for all of you. That's the deal. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. And these words, what words? One chapter earlier, the 10 commandments that are given, the giving of the law, those words you shall have on your heart. He continues, you shall teach them diligently to your children. It starts there. Talk of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by your way, your private life and your public life. When you lie down and when you rise up. So at the start and at the end of every day, you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. See, in everything you touch and in everything you do, and as you perceive and interact with the world around you, write them on the doorposts of your house and on the gates, in full view of your neighbors and in full view of the broader world. It starts at home and it goes outward in concentric, relational, situational circles, encompassing every aspect of a person's life. So to put this promise of the fifth commandment in its proper context, we could say this: honor your parents and your life will just go better. In your home, in your family, with your children, in the community, and at your job, in everything. But what does it mean to honor? Well, if you're like me, you don't really know, but you know it when you see it. Perhaps a good word to use to describe honor is respect. The Lord calls us to respect our parents because they are our parents. You don't have to agree with them all the time, but you ought to respect them, if for no other reason than the sheer fact that they brought you into this world. Now, there's an epidemic today among some Gen Z adults who are cutting off all interaction with their family members, and their parents. This is known as going no contact. I don't know if you've heard of it, but this is a real thing. The intentional estrangement of your parents. There's multiple journal articles and studies looking at this phenomenon. But in short, the idea is that the adult children feel as though their parents are not giving them the respect that they deserve. I've changed the names here in this next story that I want to share you, and you'll understand why. We have friends that I'll call Dan and Cindy. And Dan is also a worship minister, and we've known each other and worked together for many, many years. And Dan and Cindy were so excited when their son Gavin got engaged and married a young lady named Susan. The wedding was beautiful and everything seemed lovely until the days immediately following the wedding. And over the course of their honeymoon, Susan informed Gavin that in no uncertain terms, they were going to be going no contact with his family, cutting off his parents and his brothers. No phone calls, no visits, no holidays, zero contact. And this was heartbreaking, as you can imagine. And our friends were at a loss as to what to do. It went on for a few years. And the only communication they had during that entire time was when their high school son, Jordan, who still lived at home, would play on the Xbox, and Gavin would get on the Xbox, and they would be able to communicate and sneak messages online to each other without Susan knowing it. I mean, that sounds so dysfunctional, right? It's terrible. I'm happy to report that eventually Dan and Cindy were able to request and get a meeting with Gavin and Susan, and they were able to start to mend and slowly rebuild relationships, and they've been set on a path of forgiveness and repair. Well, that's got to be a one-off, right? I mean, how often does that happen? I know another family who's gone through almost the exact same thing. And just between services, 2 other people have stopped me and told me that they either experience it themselves or have a family member who has. Just imagine the years of memories and milestones lost by going no contact. Funerals, family reunions, childbirths, graduations, recitals, sporting events. I just read a report last week about a lady who had been no contact with her mom for 10 years. Finally, she came to understand the absurdity of that choice, but in the meantime, she had missed her grandmother's funeral. Her mom had missed out on seeing her daughter get married and the birth of her grandchildren. It's sad, and it's all for nothing. When the daughter reopened the relationship with her mom, thankfully, mom was gracious and received her. And she had commented at the time, for 10 years, I've been hoping and praying that my daughter would see the error and would change her mind. And gratefully, she did. But at what cost? Now, we can recognize that no parents are perfect. Never have been. I'm not perfect. My parents weren't perfect. I doubt the perfect parents are in this room here today. Parenting is difficult. It's hard. We all make mistakes, and this has been true for all time and for billions of people. And parents, if we're honest, we recognize our shortcomings. We have to be willing to accept those and maybe in the right time take ownership and apologize if need be. But in most cases, if as a young adult, simply by the virtue of the fact you've aged into the category of adulthood, that you think you deserve to be prioritized, highly respected by all your elders, immune to questions about your choices, and entitled to grievances over past perceived slights, then you're the problem, not your parents. We'll get nowhere demanding respect from our parents, or from anyone for that matter. Respect is earned, and that's just the truth of it. Your parents not accounting for instances where real harm has been done, and that does happen, for sure. But apart from those instances, your parents have earned your respect and you owe it to them, just because they're your parents. And that may sound too black and white and too matter of fact for you, but hear me out. If you fail to respect your parents, then you're punishing them in the cruelest of ways, and perhaps even worse, you're insulating yourself inside your own misery and calling it maturity. But here's the promise. If you'll condition yourself to show your parents respect, despite how imperfect they may be, and you'll find that those needed conversations can and likely will happen in time. You'll unlock this great treasure of knowledge that your parents faced some of the same concerns and challenges you now face when they were your age. And this is a beautiful gift of growing up into adulthood and accepting the perspective that comes with true maturity. So for your own good and theirs, respect your parents. And demonstrating respect for our parents really goes beyond just our immediate mother and father, but really outward into our society and community, and respecting our elders. And whether you know all of these people or not, you're surrounded by people who got here before you. And to some degree, they've created the world in which you are privileged to exist. You don't have to agree with them, vote for the same people, or be best friends, but you owe them respect. And any society that has failed to uphold the respect of elders has paid the price for it. You see, we're just not the same as somebody else who's older than we are, be that our parents or anyone else. Time has not created us all equal. We'll never have the same experience or wisdom as someone who is older, because those things aren't granted to us. They're accumulated, tested, hard fought, and earned. If you fail to show respect to your elders, then you're creating a world in which an older version of you is going to wake up to find that nobody respects or honors you. But the promise is this: if you will model respect and honor for your elders, those who are younger will see it, and they will do the same, and in turn emulate those behaviors, and so on, and so on. The cheat code to unlocking being respected in your old age is to show respect to those who are older than you are now. And we have an opportunity in the life of our congregation to honor one of our longtime faithful servants, Kathy Hannum. Kathy has served the Lord and his bride here at First Christian for 5 decades. And so today, we'll honor her. She's embodied from the time she started on staff to now a humility and a care for the families of this congregation, young and old. So this afternoon, be sure to join us down in the fellowship hall at 2 o'clock for a reception as we commemorate Kathy's work here and as we give thanks for what she's done. In 2021, my parents moved in with me and Becky Now, my dad's prostate cancer had been in remission, but he was definitely feeling the pains of his back and his knee and unable to do all the things he liked to do. My mom had also developed some pulmonary fibrosis and needed to move out of the relentless heat and humidity and dust and pollen in the climate they were living in South Texas. Now, from the start, it was clear that my dad really could no longer drive anymore. His vision and reaction time, let's just say, were less than optimal, and it wasn't safe. The last time I rode in the car with him behind the wheel, we had gone into town to pick up some pizzas, and I promise you, we barely made it home alive. When we got home, I asked him, "Why are you driving so fast?" And I kid you not, he said to me, "Well, I figure if we drive faster, we'll get there sooner." Like, well, you can't argue with logic like that, right? I just want to get there. Soon after moving in with us, we could see there were hints of his dementia developing. At the time, he was still managing their own finances and doing a lot of things around the house, what he could to help out, emptying the dishwasher, folding some clothes, getting the trash together the night before the pickup day. He would have loved to have done some yard work. He loved being outside, but some of it just got too hot and too hard for him. My mom continued to drive, and she would go and take them to all their doctor appointments. And my dad was an excellent passenger seat driver, or as he liked to call it, the navigator. Within a short time after that, his dementia was noticeably progressing. In the home, there were little things, repetitive sounds, a lot of forgetfulness, what he ate. He missed a bill, first time that had ever happened. But the wake-up call for me really was when I took him to a cognitive test at the VA clinic. And it was one of those tests where they give you the 5 words to remember, and then later in the test, they ask you to repeat them. He couldn't get a single one of them. But in between that, there's all kinds of little things. You have to draw what time it is using a second hand and an hour hand, and you have to be able to tell the difference between an orangutan and a giraffe and those kinds of things. And there's all kinds of, seems simple, and it wasn't just a few things, it was all of it. And I sat in the corner watching this unfold before me, and I was just stunned and brokenhearted for my dad. It was difficult to watch somebody you've always known to be so strong lose not only his physical strength, but his mental acuity as well. And so my dad's daily care became more and more difficult as time went on. At first, my mom was able to help him with things, but it got to a point that it was beyond her ability to physically do what he needed. And Becky and I also work during the day and are gone for different things at times. And so we became more and more increasingly worried about him falling and not having anyone there to help. His prostate cancer had metastasized into his bones, and so a fall could be devastating. Assisting with his bathrooming functions and mealtime, getting dressed in the morning, getting undressed for bed, all that and more just became part of our routine, and I was honored to be able to do those things for him. And through it all, my dad always expressed appreciation. He was just profuse with his compliments and his gratitude, and he would usually say thank you, but in French, because he knew a little bit of French from being stationed in France. He would say, "You're great," and "I love you," and all those kinds of things. That meant a lot. But everything finally reached a point where we could no longer give him the constant care that he needed. And so we had to decide and make the decision to move him into a skilled care facility. And it was very difficult because he and my mom just had really never conceived that this time would come. It's not how they thought things would play out. But the risks of him remaining at home were too great. And in addition to that, the situation was aggravating some of my mom's health issues, just compounding the problem. So we knew he would receive the care he needed, and we moved him into Compass Park up in Franklin. And there he received the care that he deserved. And after just a few months at Compass Park, his dementia and the effects of his cancer began to take their toll. And you won't know this, but during Mother's Day here, during our church services, we were singing some songs, and my phone started blowing up, and it was the nursing home. I couldn't answer the call because, well, we were right in the middle of singing. But as soon as I got off the platform, I didn't come around to listen to Steve's sermon. Sorry. I went back and I was calling the nursing home to find out what was going on. And the nurse told me that he had begun to show some signs that indicated that the end was perhaps near. And during the week before Mother's Day, I had been up to see my dad, and so I knew what she was talking about. He just was not the same. And if you would have met my dad prior to all of this, he was just bubbling with joy. When you would come into the room and he hadn't met you before, he would hop out of his chair and put on his Vietnam vet hat and come over and shake your hand and probably say a few things in French or German, because he liked to do that, and maybe even a little Polish there. But this wasn't the case when I went to see him that week before Mother's Day. He was laying in the bed, shriveled, barely moving, and I knew we had turned a corner. So back to Mother's Day, as soon as services were over, I drove up to see him and found him even less responsive. The nursing staff suggested we bring hospice in, and we began to prepare for him possibly passing that week. By the time I got back home, hospice called me and they said things were really progressing fast and he could be gone by tomorrow, Monday. And then 45 minutes later, they called again and let me know he was gone. So I headed back up to Franklin and I sat with him in the nursing home as the nursing home staff and hospice did the things they needed to do. And then Trent Morgan from the funeral home here in Columbus came up to help prepare my dad's body and transport him down here. Over the next few days, I worked on all of the arrangements that needed to be done and attentive to the things that he and my mom had discussed ahead of time. And I'm really grateful for Trent and all he did for us, how he handled things with such compassion and professionalism. Within a couple weeks of his passing, we decided to hold a memorial service for my dad here in the chapel. And it honestly wasn't anything he had requested or he and my mom actually really wanted at all. But my brother and I discussed it with her, and we really felt that it was one way we could honor him. This man had taken us in, boys that weren't his own, provided a life of security for our mother, and cared for our grandmother to the very end. And he did it all without ever complaining, or at least not that we know. And we've learned a few things through this journey of caring for my mom and my dad these last few years. And you may be in a similar situation, or maybe you're not in that stage of life yet. Perhaps you're years away from even thinking about having these discussions, but I hope that some of our observations might help you if and when that time comes. So the first thing I would encourage you with is to have conversations now. Parents, adult children, have those conversations. No one ever thinks that the day will come when they will start to have to give up some independence. But it comes for us all. And if you wait until that moment, then you'll find that your options may be greatly limited and perhaps none that you would prefer. So things like a living will, living trust, look into those things. And those don't have to cost thousands of dollars. There's actually ministries that will help people set those things up. Put the names on the bank accounts. Decide who's getting the jewelry and the china and the furniture and the whatevers. Have those conversations now. If you at all can, secondly, let the bygones be bygones. Most of us have some regrets if we're honest. And let's be honest, not all the bad stuff was somebody else's fault. Things happen, and sometimes we can't even remember why we're still upset about something years ago, and it's just not worth it. Swallow your pride, open your heart, and open your arms. And third, remember, the promise of long life extends far beyond your years on earth. God's promise is generational. Our kids all know what we're doing, and I think sometimes they think we're insane. But we want to carry ourselves in dignity because Becky and I recognize that at some point we will need our sons, our daughters-in-law, our grandchildren to take care of us. I want to be at the point where it's a joy to honor us in that way. That was one thing about my grandma. As she aged, she was happy and cheerful and as much as she could, full of energy. And as a musician herself, she loved music in church, and I would see older people in the church just get so angry and miserable about things. And there my grandma was like, turn it up, play some faster songs, get those drums going. How about some minor keys? I'm like, who are you? This is my grandma. And I decided at a very young age, I know that as we get old, there's a drift towards discomfort and experiencing some misery and pain and aches and sadness. So I want to make every effort I can to have joy and happiness and fun. And so we hope that we will be worthy of the honor of the care that is provided for us by the generations that we're leaving behind. I carry the name Radecki because a man married my mom and then adopted me. And I'm not Polish, as far as I know, but I do know some Polish jokes. I don't know if we can say that anymore, Polak jokes, but we did in our house all the time, and my dad loved it. And his parents were first-generation immigrants from Poland. One of my favorite Christmas gifts we got our dad was a Polish coffee mug. The handle was on the inside of the mug. He loved that. But I have no Polish ancestry. But I am a Radecki. And as we were raising our sons, we would often say to them when they'd leave the house, going out, going to an event, going on a trip, you're a Radecki, so act like it. We don't know what that was exactly, but it was an identity and a standard that we were setting for them. Now we have two more little Radeckis, our grandsons, and hopefully more to come. And we honor my dad as each passing generation carries on his name. And we also honor him in our memory. Yesterday, Becky drove up to Indianapolis to where our oldest son lives, Parker, and where our two grandsons are. And she brought our grandson, Paxton, home with her to visit for a couple days. And we get to do this often. We're so grateful that we live this close. They were driving down the interstate, and it was kind of quiet for a moment. And just out of nowhere, Paxton said, "Gaga, I'm sad." She said, "Well, why are you sad, Paxton?" "I miss great-grandpa Jan." Don't know where that came from. It's one of those out of the mouths of babes kind of things. But in that small, innocent statement from this little boy, he summed up so much of what that fifth commandment means: to honor your parents, that you might live long. And I pray that each of us might know what that is. Perhaps there's no greater example of honoring parents than in the very life of Jesus himself. As a 12-year-old boy, we read about how Jesus had slipped away from his parents and he went to go teach among the religious leaders. And when his parents finally found him, they rebuked him. And though Jesus knew that he was doing his Father's work, he submitted to his parents. At the age of 30, he was attending a wedding, and the host of the wedding had run out of wine, and that's no good for a reception. And so his mother, perhaps for social reasons, asked Jesus to do something about it. Well, he initially declined. I mean, to put this into context, he hadn't really begun his ministry yet. And such a miracle of turning water into wine would garner a lot of unwanted attention. And his time had not yet come. But he turned the water into wine anyway, because his mom asked him to. And there, hanging from the cross, one of the very final words Jesus uttered was to provide for the care of his mom by placing her in the care of his best friend, John. Throughout his ministry, Jesus fixed his eyes on his Father, accomplishing the Father's will and bringing him honor. And this brings us to this table. For it's at the table we remember him. When we eat the bread, we pledge to do as he did, to honor our Heavenly Father.